Joellen McCarthy, and I'm a lifelong learner and educator who believes in the power of read-alouds. I'm also the proud author of Layers of Learning, where I share my thinking around the ways we can use picture books to connect literacy and caring conversations. Together, let's connect our students to the stories, the people, and the possibilities for learning on and off the pages of their books. Welcome back to the Behind the Book series with Joellen McCarthy. I'm super excited to have a special guest, friend, author, amazing award-winning author, Matt de la Peña, joining us. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here.
I love looking behind you and seeing all of your books. And I have a stack here because, of course, we're going to talk about Milo, which I absolutely love. But this is now your third collaboration with Christian, correct?
It is.
For those people who have not been fortunate enough to read this beautiful collaboration with you and Christian, and it's from Penguin Books, would you be so kind as to give us a quick little book talk?
Sure. Milo Imagines the World is about a young boy who's going to visit his mother. We don't know where she is at the beginning of the story. He boards the subway with his much older sister. And to pass the time, because he's a little anxious about where they're going, he looks at the people around him, and he basically takes a little piece of information, mostly their face, and he builds a story of their lives. So to do this, he sketches where he thinks they're going, but he also just has this imagination that's pretty creative, and he has these ideas of where they're going, what their lives are about. And so that's kind of how he passes the time. And the New York City subway is just full of stories, and he's interested in them. But as he moves along, something happens in the story that makes him rethink all of the stories he told himself about these people, and it makes him reimagine the world. So even though the book is called Milo Imagines the World, it's really about him reimagining what he was sort of like making up in terms of the stories of these people. And then it closes with him visiting his mom. And the last bit of the book is actually a reimagining of his own life.
It's so beautiful, and I absolutely adore this book. And I have to say that even with Behind the Book, one of the things that is so wonderful is that we get a chance to interview authors and illustrators, and then kids and teachers can hear the story behind the story. But
Sure.
You've done, and Christian has done, an amazing job with your specific, dedications that really does capture a little bit more of the behind the scenes story, like your purpose and your intention. So would you mind sharing with us the dedication, which I'm sure you know by heart, but we have it right here.
Let's see. Yeah, let's see what it is real quick. Could you read it? Do you mind?
Sure. So it's for Miguel, and it says, "And for those who dare to imagine beyond a first impression." That was yours. And then Christian's was for the children and inner children who see themselves in this book.
So, I've long been thinking about writing a book that challenges the idea of lazy stereotypes, which is something we all kind of lean on in our lives. I imagine like this. So I think when we see people and we see one little detail of their life, it could be visual, it could be the way they look, the color of their skin, the way they're dressed, tattoos, whatever it is. We take that little piece of information and we sort of speculate, from that point on to kind of build out who we think they are. And then I think what we do is we put them in a box. We have our label in our head, put them up on a shelf, and we think, well, we know who that person is. And we don't have to bring it down and interact with it anymore because I already know who that person is. And I've been long trying to tell a story that challenges that, because I think behind every face you see, there's an entire story that we do not have access to. And it's usually very complex. There's no black and white when it comes to people, right? There's great parts about them. There's things that they wish they could hide. There's insecurities. There are things they're proud about. So I guess what I really was trying to challenge readers to do is kind of interact with people in their lives with generosity and just sort of remain open beyond that first impression. And I think that's an act of bravery to do that. It's not easy to do.
I'm getting emotional hearing you talk because I think this is the kind of book that brings to the forefront those emotions for teachers who have these conversations with kids who perhaps weren't very generous in their first impressions, or even for anyone just to acknowledge their own individual biases, right? Biases, excuse me.
Yes.
As you said earlier on, the reader writes the story. So even when you have an intention and you put a book out into the world, everyone's going to interpret it based on their prior experience, their knowledge, those biases, everything. And so to bring this to a classroom and to have that conversation and to unpack that with kids is just really amazing and incredible. And one of my favorite quotes, and we'll probably put this on the pop-up, is from you, where you talked about books being tools. And I know we've presented together before about using books, to invite conversations. And
Yeah.
and so you say how it's that physical book and the book that holds the words and the words that hold the pages all together. They're not alive until humans enter the equation and what we
Yeah.
bring with us, right? So could you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. I think, over the course of my career, I've started to understand the role of the author better. Because I'll be honest, when I was a new author, I thought it was like about me, like I had a brand new book, my first book, and it was like, it's me. You're looking through the book to see me. But what I've learned over the course of my career is that's the authorial arrogance getting in the way of really what's happening, which is that you're telling a story. Christian's illustrating that story and his own story alongside your story. The book goes out into the world, and now it is no longer mine, and I'm no longer important. So at that point, it's all about what readers see. And it's often the case when I go into a classroom, especially. And by the way, I love that you're speaking specifically about the teaching element, because when you unpack a good picture book, and there's so many great ones behind you right now, I'm looking at them. Um, there's so many interesting places you can go. I do that as a parent. But so once the book is out in the world is going to use it as a tool in whatever way it wants. And different families are going to unpack different things. Different classrooms are going to unpack different things. Often, I don't fully understand what my book is about until I walk into a classroom and the kids tell me what it is. And then, of course, the next classroom I go to, I own that and act like that was my intention. But, like it's just magical what happens with a young person and a book. It's really, I'll tell you, like Joelle, and one of the things that I think is cool about being a children's author is I think sometimes adults, we tend to gravitate toward books that are going to reinforce our current ideologies, right? So we want to read things and say to ourselves, oh, yeah, that's what I think too. But kids haven't solidified what they think yet. So they're just open to going wherever the tool takes, or the book or slash tool takes them. And I think that's the magic of books.
Oh, absolutely. That is so beautiful and so well said. And I think, to your point, like just seeing this story and the love and the joy between he and his mom, and that, it's not an issue book. And I think, that I think is what you and Christian have so beautifully done in preparing, a story that just celebrates the love between family, and that, then in his own introspection, he gets to see and think about, other aspects of people's lives. And I think that's what the book does, and all books can do, as you say. I'm wondering if there are some stories behind the story that we may not know about. Like when I look at this text again, I can't help my, teacher lens thinking about, wanting to pick up the beautiful language. You are so gifted and talented in that way. And one line that just resonated with me, and I thought, oh, I wonder how, because I know we've talked about this when you're in the process of writing, just the page where you talk about the monthly subway rides, and you say, monthly Sunday subway rides are never ending. And as usual, Milo is a shook up soda. Excitement stacked on top of worry, on top of confusion, on top of love. That's just such beautiful language. And
Thank you.
could you talk a little bit about the process in
Yeah,
writing that?
sure. So I remember one, like a lot of authors, I steal from my own life all the time and just impose it into the book, because it's interesting, right? Um, I remember being a young boy. I was pretty good at basketball, but I was a very mediocre student. And I knew that my dream was to play basketball in college so I could get an education. It allowed me to be the first in my family to be there. But once I got to college, I remember thinking, well, I'm not good enough to play professional, but I have this free education. And I remember thinking, I have all this ambition and I don't know where to point it. And it felt like I was a shook up soda in that way, where I was like, I know it wants to explode somewhere, but I don't know which direction to point it in. And it was very confusing because I had all this stuff I wanted to do, but I didn't know what it was, you know? And so when I was writing Milo's story, I thought of his journey and how complex it is. He loves his mother. He can't wait to see her. And he's scared to see her. And he's scared of his fear, to see her. He's with his sister. All these emotions that he doesn't know what to do with. And I really think so many kids have that shook up soda feeling for various reasons. And that's one of the cool things about books, right? So a kid who has parents who are arguing and they're worried that they might split apart could be a shook up soda. You know what I mean? So that line translates beyond just Milo's experience. I'll tell you one other little secret about the book. I don't know if you have the page where Milo and the boy who's got the part and the suit and the fresh shoes, they're staring at each other. And, Christian and I have talked a lot about this moment because here's this boy, Milo, and he's looking at a boy who he thinks he has more, I don't know, more opportunities, is in a higher status in America. And that is pulled from the most personal place. I remember being a young boy and I had one pair of shorts that I wore everywhere, every day. And we would wash them a couple times a week. But that's who I was, right? I just had a pair of shorts. I grew up in San Diego, so you didn't need pants. And I remember every once in a while, I would be somewhere where I'd see a boy that was my age, and I'd look at him and I would feel my world closing in on me. It was almost like I was imprisoning myself and creating limitations for myself. And I really wanted to share that in that picture, where I think Milo, for the first time in the book, he's almost limiting himself by looking at someone he thinks has a better situation than him. And so that's one that really comes to mind in terms of like a secret place, in my background.
I wonder, because you bring up Christian Robinson's beautiful artwork, and since you have such a unique relationship, author, illustrator, friends, you've collaborated before, how much do you guys talk about the work as it's in process? Like, I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
It's a great question. So, you probably know this, but not everybody does. Picture books often, they work like this. The author writes the text goes to the publisher figures out who the illustrator is, and the author and illustrator don't talk until the book is out. Well, with Christian and I, it's a little different. We've worked together several times, and now we text throughout the whole process. So the book began when we were on tour for Carmela, and we had a little time to kill and before our event, and we sat down and we started to discuss, well, what do we want to do next? And that was the first time Christian said, well, I have to be honest, like I've always kind of wanted to explore why I wasn't raised by my mom. And so he shared that. And I remember thinking, he doesn't know this, but that's what I've been kind of doing in a lot of my young adult books, is working with the system, foster care, juvenile hall, group homes. So it fit in line with what I'd done in my young adult, but I was curious about how do I do it in a picture book? So that's where it started. Then when he's doing the pictures, he reads the text, and there are a couple times he'll text me and say, hey, Matt, what do you mean she had a face made out of light. And I would be like, oh, well, I'd write him this long dissertation about, well, she's so excited. She's going to go be married and she's so excited. Can't wait. This is her big day. So she's glowing. And then I know Christian will not write me back. He'll just take that information, process it, and allow it to come out. And later on, we talked about why he asked that question. And his main thing is he wanted to make the wedding dress woman African-American, but he thought maybe a face made out of light meant she was white. So I think I gave him the green light to do whatever he wanted to do racially, which is so interesting, right?
But when you look at the book, and I don't know how closely you can see from the camera angle, but the actual face of this character, you can almost see like a glow or a sparkle that obviously was intentional for Christian.
Yeah.
But, just hearing you talk about that, I hadn't looked that closely at that piece. And I think that's, what is so important for teachers to do. And what else do you see? What else do you notice? And, here we're hearing it from you, which is wonderful. And I thank you for that. But, being able to like investigate the authors and the illustrators and the stories and the interviews and say, oh, I read this. And so let's go back and look at that. And what else does it make you think or feel? And I think that's also a real gift in being able to go back to that picture book, because it's endless and the possibilities, can go on and on and on about analyzing the illustrations, the images. And as you could tell, I'm a little excited about this book.
Can I share one more thing with you that
Please.
Since we're going to present maybe this to teachers, the thing I most want to share with teachers is something that maybe parents will never get to when they're reading it to their child, but I'm very fascinated by picture books that respect a child's interior. So if you look at his artwork, he's really working through what's happening in his life. So in every imagined scenario, there's a form of emancipation, right? So you got the parakeets who fly free of the cage. You have the clink, clink, clink of the drawbridge, and then you have the wedding dressed woman, rising up over the walls of the city and being free in the blue. So he's working through this idea of emancipation. And obviously we get the final image of the book, which is really trying to hit on that. And that's what I love about like Where the Wild Things Are. You're actually seeing a young boy explore adult sensibilities in his interior with this Where the Wild Things Are. And, I want to try to honor the interior of young people that way as much as possible. And by the way, if you don't have a teacher who's digging deep like that, maybe a reader will never get there, but it's there if they want to dig that deep,
Mm-hmm. That's a great point too, because we want kids to just enjoy stories, and we don't want,
Absolutely.
we don't want anyone to feel like you have to analyze every piece. It's just with your work and, complemented by Christian's artwork together. It's so powerful because of the fact that we can have, various ways to look at this. And you can look at this with a kindergartner, and you could also look at this with a 12th grader and have, totally different conversations, just as meaningful and just as powerful. So that's the other gift.
That's what you hope for. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you guys have achieved that. Let me tell you. If you can tell us, is there anything new that you're working on that?
Yes. So I am so thrilled that I get to work with Karina Lukin, who did the Book of Mistakes. And we are doing a book called Patchwork. And she's actually doing the art as we sit here right now on Zoom. And it's really a book about, I feel like so many young people, I have young children of my own. And I think a lot of young people, when they're young now, today in 2021, they feel this pressure to know who they are when they're like 7 years old or 10 years old. It's like, I'm really good at dance. I'm a dancer. That's what I am. I'm just a dancer. Maybe I'll do school, I'll be good at math, but I'm a dancer. Or, I'm really good at fixing things. And like, I'm going to go into like, I don't know, math or sciences. So I wanted to challenge that with Patchwork. And like the rhythm is something like, you're good at dancing. We see, but one day you're going to discover coding and blah, 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 and change the way the world moves, So it's like how these skills that kids develop when they're young, they may use them in the future, but it might not be the way they are expecting. So it's just this idea that we're a collection of things that we're good at.
That sounds fabulous. I can't wait for that. I'm super excited again for anything that you do. And I just, I think that it's wonderful because you already have said so many things that I hope teachers will take and run with, and even just the idea of the shook up soda and thinking about how anyone can use that as imagery to then spark a line of writing or spark a piece of text. And, even with Patchwork, getting teachers and students to think about what are those things that we're passionate about and what might that then transcend to become in the possibilities. So I thank you for that. But that, for me, books are my co-teachers. So even when you're not here to have this conversation, I think it's something that is a gift for teachers. And I thank you.
Absolutely.